Do you know that the UK is currently on the brink of a national collapse? It might sound extreme, but the signs are everywhere, from skyrocketing living costs to rising crime rates. In fact, over 1 in 5 people in the UK are now living in poverty, and more than 500,000 citizens have turned to food banks just to survive. These numbers aren't just alarming. They're a clear indicator that something is terribly wrong with how the country is being run. But what's causing this downfall? It's not just one thing. The government's policies are driving the UK down a dangerous path, and today, we're going to uncover 10 shocking reasons why. From the economic mismanagement that's leaving people struggling to make ends meet, to the housing crisis that's leaving young people without a future, the problems seem endless. And it doesn't stop there. The lack of investment in essential services, the environmental failures, and the aftermath of Brexit are all contributing to a toxic mix that's weakening the nation. But are these issues inevitable, or can the government turn things around before it's too late? Stick with us, because what you'll discover in the next few minutes might just change your perspective on the future of the UK. The question is, will we see the collapse of a once great nation, or can it still be saved? Stay tuned to find out. Number 1. Economic mismanagement. The UK's economic situation is teetering on the edge of disaster, and the government's handling of finances is a major reason why. Over the past decade, mismanagement has led to unsustainable debt, rising inflation, and a cost of living crisis that's squeezing families like never before. One of the most striking issues is the government's reckless spending. While it's normal for governments to borrow money, what's concerning is how the UK's debt has soared to record-breaking levels. UK national debt has skyrocketed past £2.7 trillion, and this burden is crushing the country's financial future. The problem is compounded by inflation, which has surged above 10% in recent years, causing prices for everyday essentials like food, fuel, and housing to soar. As a result, people's purchasing power has significantly declined. But it's not just about borrowing money. The government's lack of investment in key sectors like technology, education, and infrastructure means that the country is failing to prepare for the future. Business investment is at a near standstill, while government policies don't seem to encourage innovation or productivity. This makes the UK less competitive on the global stage. As businesses falter, jobs are lost, leading to a stagnant economy that's unable to grow. Moreover, tax cuts for the wealthy and businesses have led to an erosion of public funds, and the wealth gap has never been wider. The government's economic strategy seems to prioritize short-term gain for a few, while long-term prosperity for the country as a whole remains in jeopardy. What does this mean for you? Well, with the increasing financial instability, wages staying stagnant, and public services being slashed, it's the average citizen who bears the brunt of these mistakes. The future seems uncertain, and without a significant shift in policy, this economic mismanagement could spell disaster for the UK. Number 2. Failure to address housing crisis. The housing crisis in the UK is not just a problem, it's a ticking time bomb. While government policies continue to fail the nation, millions of citizens are being left in the lurch, unable to find affordable homes, and stuck in a never-ending cycle of rising rent and house prices. Right now, the UK has a severe shortage of affordable housing. According to recent reports, there are not enough homes to meet the demand, with over 1.3 million households on waiting lists for social housing. Meanwhile, private rent prices are climbing to unprecedented levels, the average rent now higher than ever before, leaving tenants feeling like they're stuck in a system they can't escape. But why is this happening? The government's approach to housing has been short-sighted and ineffective. For years, successive governments have failed to build enough homes, especially affordable ones, and the policies in place don't do enough to address the crisis. Housing development is either too slow or geared toward luxury properties, which don't benefit the people who need help the most. Meanwhile, the lack of support for first-time buyers means that younger generations are priced out of the market, with many stuck renting for years, if not decades. The result? Generational inequality. Young people today face a reality where owning a home feels like an impossible dream. Those who are fortunate enough to get on the property ladder are often burdened by crushing debt from rising mortgage costs. This growing divide between property owners and renters is also causing social unrest. as frustration builds with a system that seems rigged against the ordinary citizen. The housing crisis isn't just a problem for individuals, it has serious economic consequences too. With fewer people owning homes, there is less wealth building and fewer people able to contribute to a stable, growing economy. The government's failure to act has left the country with a housing situation that will only worsen unless bold reforms are made. Number 3. Lack of investment in education. One of the most concerning long-term impacts of the UK's current government policies is the chronic underinvestment in education. For a country to thrive, its future workforce needs to be prepared, skilled, and ready to adapt to changing global demands. However, the government's approach to education over the past decade has set the stage for an uncertain and unproductive future. The UK has witnessed a significant reduction in funding for schools. Budget cuts have led to larger class sizes, underpaid teachers, and a lack of essential resources for students. Schools are increasingly struggling to provide a high standard of education, which in turn limits opportunities for students. Teachers are facing growing pressures, with many leaving the profession due to burnout and low morale. This is a dangerous cycle. Without strong, well-supported educators, the quality of education diminishes. At the same time, tuition fees for higher education have reached staggering levels. Students now face debts of up to £50,000 or more by the time they graduate, without any guarantee of a well-paying job afterward. For many young people, the hope of a debt-free future has been replaced with the reality of financial strain, making higher education a daunting prospect rather than an exciting opportunity. This lack of investment is already being felt in the workforce. As the UK faces an increasing skills gap, industries such as technology, healthcare, and engineering are struggling to find qualified workers. The government's failure to prioritize education, both at the primary and tertiary levels, is directly contributing to economic stagnation. Without investing in the education system, the country is condemning its future generations to a life of limited opportunity. Innovation and progress depend on education, and without it, the UK's economy and social stability will continue to decline. The question is, will the government realize the importance of education before it's too late? Number 4. Healthcare system overload. The UK's healthcare system, the NHS, has long been a source of national pride, but today it's in crisis. Years of underfunding, mismanagement, and a failure to address systemic issues have left the NHS overwhelmed and struggling to meet the demands of a growing and aging population. Government's response has been woefully inadequate, and the consequences are being felt by millions of citizens. One of the most pressing problems is the growing waiting lists for medical treatments. According to recent reports, over 7 million people are waiting for hospital treatment, with some patients waiting up to 18 months for essential surgeries. This backlog isn't just a number. It represents real people who are in pain, suffering, and waiting for care that could improve or save their lives. The delays are becoming more severe, as hospitals and clinics are stretched to their limits. With staff shortages and insufficient funding, the NHS is also facing an ongoing staffing crisis, with over 100,000 unfilled roles in the health service. This shortage of healthcare workers means that the remaining staff are overworked, burnt out, and struggling to provide the level of care that patients deserve. Nurses, doctors, and support staff are increasingly leaving the profession due to stress, low pay, and poor working conditions. This only exacerbates the problem, creating a vicious cycle that is hard to break. Beyond waiting times and staffing shortages, the government's decision to cut healthcare funding has had a devastating impact. Hospitals are closing wards, medical equipment is out of date, and mental health services are underfunded and overstretched. These cuts not only affect quality of care, but also undermine the very foundation of the NHS, putting public health at risk. The question remains, how long can the government continue to ignore the growing problems within the NHS before the system completely collapses under the strain? Without urgent reform and investment, the healthcare system that millions of people rely on could cease to function properly, leading to devastating consequences for the entire nation. Number 5. Climate change in action. While climate change is a global issue, UK's government has been shockingly slow to take meaningful action. Despite clear warnings from scientists and experts about the urgent need to address the climate crisis, the government's policies remain largely half-hearted and ineffective. putting the country's future and the world's at grave risk. One of the major failures has been the lack of investment in renewable energy. While the UK has made some progress in shifting toward greener energy sources, such as wind and solar power, the pace has been far too slow to meet the country's future energy demands. Government's refusal to make bold investments in this area means that the UK remains heavily reliant on fossil fuels, increasing both carbon emissions and the nation's vulnerability to energy price volatility. But it's not just about energy. Climate change is contributing to more extreme weather patterns, with floods, droughts, and heat waves becoming increasingly frequent in the UK. These natural disasters are causing immense damage to infrastructure, agriculture, and homes. Despite the mounting evidence of the dangers, the government's response has been weak, lacking the urgency required to protect citizens and safeguard the country's future. The consequences of this inaction will not be felt in the distant future. They're happening now. As the climate crisis worsens, the UK's economic stability will continue to decline, creating widespread social unrest and displacement. The failure to act means that future generations will inherit a world that is not just unsustainable, but dangerous. If the UK is to secure its future, swift and decisive action on climate change is crucial. Without it, the government's negligence could contribute to the downfall of the nation, making it more vulnerable to the growing environmental threats of tomorrow. We've put a lot of effort into creating this video to shed light on these crucial issues, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let us know what you think. Your perspective matters. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. It's just one click to stay informed and help us keep producing content that matters to you. Number 6. Brexit and its unforeseen consequences. The decision to leave the European Union, commonly known as Brexit, has had far-reaching consequences for the UK. While some politicians promised that exiting the EU would lead to greater sovereignty and economic prosperity, the reality has been starkly different. Government's handling of Brexit has created a series of unintended consequences that are slowly unraveling the UK's economic and political stability. One of the most significant impacts of Brexit has been the disruption of trade between the UK and the EU. With new customs checks, tariffs, and border regulations in place, businesses are now facing delays and additional costs when trading with European countries. This has led to supply chain breakdowns, particularly for industries that rely on seamless trade, such as food, pharmaceuticals, and manufacturing. The increase in costs has not only led to higher prices for consumers, but has also made British products less competitive on the international market. Brexit has also created labor shortages across key industries. With freedom of movement restricted, many EU nationals who worked in sectors like agriculture, healthcare, and construction either left the UK or are no longer willing to come. This has left businesses scrambling to fill vacancies, further stalling economic recovery and productivity. Moreover, the political consequences of Brexit continue to create divisions within the UK. Northern Ireland, in particular, has been caught in the crossfire of the EU's trade regulations and the UK's desire for independence. Northern Ireland Protocol has created friction between the UK and EU, leading to rising tensions and challenges to the integrity of the United Kingdom. Brexit was sold as the solution to many of the UK's problems, but the reality is far different. Trade disruptions, labor shortages, and political instability are just the beginning. Long-term consequences of Brexit may continue to hinder the UK's recovery for years to come. Number 7. Declining trust in government. One of the most destructive outcomes of the UK's current political landscape is the growing decline in trust that citizens have in their government. Trust is the cornerstone of any functioning democracy. But in recent years, the UK government has made a series of decisions that have caused public confidence to plummet. And when people lose trust in their leaders, the very fabric of society begins to unravel. Scandals have been a regular feature in the headlines. For its corruption within the ranks, mismanagement of public funds, or inconsistent policies, the government's inability to act transparently has led to a deep sense of disillusionment among the public. High-profile incidents such as the Partygate scandal, where government officials were caught breaching their own COVID-19 rules, have only fueled the perception that politicians are out of touch with the reality faced by ordinary citizens. Moreover, broken promises are a constant theme. Time and time again, Politicians have failed to deliver on key pledges made during elections. From healthcare reforms to promises of economic recovery, citizens feel let down by the very people they elected to represent them. These unfulfilled promises lead to a growing belief that politicians care more about power than the needs of the people. Consequences of this loss of trust are far-reaching, and citizens no longer believe in their leaders. They are less likely to participate in the democratic process, leading to voter apathy and political disengagement. Furthermore, the lack of accountability in government erodes the social contract that holds society together, creating divisions and encouraging frustration, protests, and even instability. Without a government that is willing to restore transparency, accountability, and a genuine commitment to the people, the UK will continue to face a deepening crisis of trust, one that may ultimately lead to even greater national turmoil. Number 8. Rising crime and safety concerns. The UK is increasingly grappling with a rising tide of crime, and the government's failure to adequately address this issue is a major factor in the country's decline. From violent crime to property theft, public safety has become a significant concern for citizens across the nation. And as the government continues to underfund police services and reduce crime prevention initiatives, communities are feeling more vulnerable than ever before. One of the most glaring problems is the under-resourcing of police forces. The growing demand for law enforcement to tackle everything from burglary to violent crime. Police departments are struggling to keep up. In some areas, there are simply too few officers to patrol communities effectively, which has led to a rise in both petty and violent crimes. In fact, recent reports show that violent crime in the UK has surged by nearly 20% over the past few years, with incidents of knife crime and gang violence on the rise, particularly in urban areas. But it's not just violent crime that's increasing. Anti-social behavior, including vandalism, public drunkenness, and drug-related offenses, is also becoming more widespread. As law enforcement agencies struggle to cope, victims of crime are often left feeling helpless. When crimes are reported, many people feel that cases are under-prioritized, and offenders rarely face appropriate consequences. This rising insecurity also has broader societal consequences. Communities are becoming more divided, with neighborhoods feeling increasingly unsafe. Local businesses are affected as crime deters people from shopping or spending time in certain areas. And, perhaps most concerning, people are often drawn into gangs or criminal activity due to the lack of opportunities and proper deterrence. If the government doesn't act to strengthen policing and invest in crime prevention programs, the rise in criminal activity will continue to undermine public confidence in the safety and stability of the UK. A failure to address these concerns will contribute to a broader societal collapse in the future. Number 9. Social inequality and poverty. The gap between the wealthy elite and the working class in the UK has grown wider than ever, and it's a gap that threatens to tear the fabric of society apart. Despite the government's promises to address inequality, the policies in place are only exacerbating the poverty crisis and leaving millions of people struggling to survive. Social inequality isn't just an issue of wealth. It impacts access to basic needs like education, healthcare, and housing, and it's holding back the nation's growth. Rising cost of living is a perfect example of how inequality is deepening. Prices for food, energy, and housing have skyrocketed, but wages have remained stagnant, leaving many people unable to afford even the most basic essentials. More than 14 million people in the UK now live in poverty, and despite the government's promises to address this, there's been little meaningful action. This has led to a situation where an increasing number of families are forced to rely on food banks, struggling to make ends meet while the wealthiest continue to accumulate more power and resources. What's even more troubling is the lack of upward mobility. People born into lower-income families are finding it harder to break out of the cycle of poverty. Education has long been touted as the path to a better life, but with underfunded schools and sky-high tuition fees, many young people can't even get the education they need to secure a well-paying job. This lack of opportunity leads to a sense of hopelessness, especially for younger generations who feel locked out of the system. As inequality continues to rise, Social unrest becomes more likely. People who are unable to meet their basic needs are more likely to protest, riot, or engage in antisocial behavior. And the government's failure to address this growing divide only fuels the fire. Unless significant changes are made, the increasing social inequality will continue to drive the UK toward a future where the divide between the rich and poor becomes insurmountable, and social stability is in jeopardy. Number 10. National security weaknesses. National security is often seen as one of the most fundamental responsibilities of any government, but the UK's current administration has significantly weakened the country's security infrastructure, leaving it vulnerable to both external threats and internal instability. With increasing global tensions and the rise of cyber warfare, the government's neglect of defense and security spending has put the UK in a perilous position. The most glaring issue is the reduction in defense spending. Over the years, the UK has cut funding to its military and intelligence services, significantly weakening the nation's ability to respond to threats. With global conflicts escalating, from terrorism to the growing tensions between world powers, the UK's ability to defend itself has become dangerously compromised. Military personnel are underpaid, overstretched, and operating with outdated equipment. The result? The country is less equipped to handle both traditional military threats and more modern challenges, like cyber attacks and information warfare. In addition to reducing military strength, the UK has also been slow to adapt to new security challenges. Cybersecurity is one area where the government has failed to keep up with the pace of change. Cyber attacks from foreign powers and criminals are on the rise, yet the UK has not invested enough in the digital infrastructure needed to safeguard the country. Hackers are gaining access to sensitive government and corporate data, and the threat of a national data breach is growing by the day. Without strong cyber defense capabilities, the UK's critical infrastructure, such as power grids, financial systems, and communication networks, remains vulnerable. Finally, internal instability caused by social unrest and economic struggles is another national security threat. As citizens lose trust in the government, frustration turns to protest, and in some cases, violence. The failure to properly address crime, economic inequality, and social unrest only fuels further tensions, making the country less stable from within. If the UK continues to neglect its national security, both internal and external threats will continue to grow, further eroding the country's ability to function effectively and safely. The consequences of these weaknesses are far-reaching, and without urgent reform, the UK's security will continue to crumble. Conclusion: the UK is facing a perfect storm of issues that are rapidly leading the country toward national collapse. Economic mismanagement, the housing crisis, underfunded education, overstretched healthcare, and a lack of action on climate change are just a few of the challenges that the government has failed to address adequately. Each of these problems is interconnected, creating a web of instability that threatens the very foundations of society. Brexit has amplified many of these issues, contributing to trade disruptions, labor shortages, and rising political tensions. Meanwhile, the declining trust in government, the surge in crime, and the growing social inequality are fostering division and dissatisfaction among the population. Finally, the UK's national security weaknesses only add to the sense of vulnerability and uncertainty. If these issues aren't tackled immediately and effectively, the UK could be headed for a future marked by economic collapse, social unrest, and global irrelevance. The stakes couldn't be higher. Solutions: to reverse the trend and avoid national collapse, the UK government needs to take bold, immediate action across several key areas. Economic reform. The UK must focus on sustainable economic policies, including reducing national debt while investing in infrastructure, technology, and innovation. Government should shift its focus from austerity to long-term growth, encouraging business investment and job creation. Prioritizing small businesses and entrepreneurship will stimulate economic recovery. Affordable housing. A housing revolution is needed to address the housing crisis. The government should invest heavily in the construction of affordable homes, prioritizing social housing for low-income families. They must also introduce measures to tackle rent inflation and give young people a real opportunity to buy homes. Education investment. Reversing cuts to schools and universities is essential. The government should prioritize education funding, ensuring that every child has access to quality education, regardless of their background. Lowering tuition fees and addressing teacher shortages will help improve educational outcomes and prepare the future workforce. Healthcare funding. The NHS must be adequately funded to handle the growing demand. This includes increased staffing, better pay for healthcare workers, and upgrading medical facilities. Additionally, addressing mental health services is critical to improving overall public health. Climate action. Immediate action on REN.